People walk into big offices every day, but no one expected what happened when a poor girl stepped into the CEO's office that morning. It began like any ordinary day in a tall corporate building where everyone was busy, dressed in clean suits, polished shoes, holding expensive phones, and chasing deadlines. But the girl who walked in looked completely different from everyone there. She wasn't wearing anything fancy. Her clothes were simple, worn out, the kind someone would hesitate to wear even at home. Her hair was a little messy, and she carried a small school-style bag that looked old but carefully held together. No one had seen her before, and the moment she walked through the front door, almost every head turned toward her. The receptionist looked up from her desk with confusion. She was used to dealing with clients worth millions, people who booked appointments weeks in advance. But this girl walked in quietly, holding a small envelope in one hand and gripping her bag strap with the other. She didn't look confident or powerful. She looked tired and scared. People in the waiting area stared at her, whispering to each other. Some of them laughed under their breath, mocking her appearance. But she didn't say a word. She didn't even look at them. She just stood there, waiting patiently, almost as if she was trying not to disturb anyone. When the receptionist finally asked who she was looking for, the girl said softly that she needed to meet the CEO. Those words alone made a few people nearby smirk. A poor girl asking to meet one of the most powerful men in the city? It sounded ridiculous to them. But the girl didn't seem bothered. She kept her eyes low and explained that it was important, very important. The receptionist quickly told her that meeting the CEO required an appointment. The girl nodded but didn't walk away. She simply said she could wait, even if it took all day. There was something in her voice, something gentle but firm, that made the receptionist pause. For a moment, minutes passed. Then an hour. Then two. The girl sat quietly in a corner, not scrolling through a phone like everyone else, not complaining, not wasting time. She just sat there, holding that same envelope, almost as if she was protecting something precious. Inside it, people came and left, important meetings took place, and the CEO's schedule stayed fully packed. But the girl didn't leave. She didn't drink water, didn't move much, didn't show any frustration. Her patience was unusual, and it made a few employees curious. They began wondering what could bring someone like her all the way to the top floor of a massive company. One of the staff members eventually approached her and asked if she needed help. The girl smiled politely and simply said she would see the CEO when she was allowed to. No complaints, no fear, just quiet determination. That moment told everyone watching that she wasn't there for something small. She wasn't lost, and she wasn't confused. She had come with a purpose, even if no one understood what it was yet. Hours later, when the CEO finally stepped out of his office to make a quick call, he noticed her sitting in the corner. She stood out immediately, not because of her clothes, but because she was the only person not rushing, not pretending to be busy, not trying to show off. She looked completely out of place, yet strangely calm. Something about her made the CEO pause. He asked the receptionist who she was, and when he learned she had been waiting the entire day just to meet him, he frowned slightly. He wasn't annoyed. He was curious. He walked toward her slowly, and people nearby pretended not to stare, but everyone's eyes were following the scene. When the girl saw him approaching, she stood instantly, almost startled. She didn't expect him to come to her, not after all the hours she waited. The CEO asked her why she wanted to meet him, and her voice trembled as she said she needed only a few minutes of his time. She handed him the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. The moment the CEO touched that envelope, something changed in his expression. No one around him could understand it, but the CEO suddenly looked unsettled, almost emotional. Though he hid it quickly, he asked her to follow him into his office. The entire staff was shocked. No one could believe that the CEO, a man known for being extremely strict with his time, actually invited a girl like her into his office without an appointment. People whispered to each other as she walked behind him, her steps small and slow, her eyes taking in the luxurious office walls that must have looked like another world to her. Some employees even leaned toward each other, wondering who she really was. Was she connected to him somehow? Did she know something important, or was this just an act of kindness? Nobody knew, but everyone watched, inside the CEO's office. She sat quietly across from him, clutching her hands together. He opened the envelope carefully, and as soon as he saw what was inside, his face changed completely. His eyebrows lowered, his jaw tightened, and for a moment he couldn't even speak. The girl noticed his reaction and slowly lowered her eyes, as if afraid of what he might say next. The silence between them grew heavier by the second. The CEO looked at the papers again, trying to process everything, and finally asked her where she had found them. The answer she gave made the CEO lean back in his chair, stunned, confused, and struggling to understand the situation, and that was the moment right there in that silent office when the story took a turn no one inside the company could have imagined, because what the girl said next would not only shock the CEO but change everything he believed about his past, his success, and the people he thought he had left behind. The CEO felt a strange heaviness in his chest as he listened to the girl's quiet voice. She explained that she found the papers while cleaning out an old storage room in the small house she lived in. She didn't know what the documents meant at first, but the logo printed on the top corner matched the one on the giant building she had seen many times from the street. That was the only clue she had, and it led her all the way to his office. She admitted she had hesitated before coming, unsure if someone like him would ever listen to someone like her, but she couldn't ignore what she had found. She believed he needed to see them. The CEO kept glancing at the papers. They weren't normal business files or financial statements. They looked older, personal, maybe even painful. The girl noticed the confusion on his face and clarified that she wasn't sure why the documents were in her house either. She lived with her grandmother, a woman she adored but who never talked much about the past. The girl had planned to ask her grandmother about the papers, but the old woman had fallen sick before she got the chance. And with medical bills piling up, she had no choice but to do something. Bringing the papers to the one person whose name appeared on them felt like the only right thing to do. The CEO took a deep breath. His voice was calmer when he asked her how her grandmother was doing. She hesitated before answering that things were difficult. Medicine was expensive, and she had been working small jobs after school to help pay for it. Food delivery, cleaning, anything she could find. That was why she sometimes dug through old boxes looking for things she could sell or reuse. She mentioned it casually, without self-pity, but the CEO felt a sting of guilt he couldn't explain. She wasn't complaining, yet her words painted a clear picture of the life she lived, a life full of struggle, a life he had no idea was connected to him in any way. The CEO finally put the papers down. He studied her face carefully, noticing small details he had missed earlier, the way her eyes looked tired but hopeful, the way she held herself like someone who had been forced to grow up too early, the quiet strength that filled every word she spoke. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place but couldn't ignore either. He asked her for her name again, wanting to hear it clearly. She repeated it softly, and the moment she did, he felt a strange chill. It reminded him of someone he once knew. Someone he hadn't thought about in years. He asked how long she had been living with her grandmother. She told him her parents had passed away when she was young, so her grandmother raised her. She didn't remember her parents well, only small pieces and blurry memories that faded more each year. She didn't talk about this often, but for some reason, she felt safe enough to share it with him. The CEO listened, feeling a deep sadness he didn't quite understand yet. Something deep inside him was stirring, as if a forgotten part of his life was slowly waking up. A knock on the door broke the silence. The CEO's assistant stepped in, reminding him of an important meeting scheduled in 5 minutes. Normally, the CEO would have stood up immediately and walked out. He ran his company with strict discipline. Time was money. But today, he didn't move. He told the assistant to delay the meeting. The assistant looked surprised, almost shocked, but nodded quickly and left the room. The girl looked at the CEO, unsure if she was causing trouble, but he assured her she wasn't. He needed answers, and those answers were tied to her. He asked her to wait a moment while he made a call. He stepped aside and dialed a number he had not used in many years. When the call connected, the sound of an elderly woman's voice filled the room. His expression softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. The girl looked up, surprised, because she recognized the voice too. It was her grandmother. She heard her name mentioned, and her heart started beating faster. Why was this powerful CEO calling her grandmother? How did they know each other? The CEO asked the old woman a simple question. Why did she have those documents? There was a long silence on the other side of the phone. Then the grandmother sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of secrets. She said she had hoped this day would never come. She admitted that she had kept the documents hidden for decades because the truth behind them was painful and complicated. She didn't want the past to hurt the girl the way it had hurt so many others. She said she had protected the girl in the only way she knew. The CEO sat down slowly, shocked by the grandmother's tone. Memories began to unravel in his mind, memories he thought he had buried. He asked the grandmother if the girl knew anything. The grandmother said no. She had never told her. She wanted the girl to grow up safe, far away from the problems that once tore their lives apart. The CEO asked if he could come see her. The grandmother hesitated but agreed. She sounded weak. The girl listened to the entire conversation with growing fear and confusion. Something huge was happening, and she didn't understand any of it. When he ended the call, the CEO looked at the girl with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't the look of a powerful businessman. It was the look of a man facing a truth he wasn't ready for. He told her they needed to visit her grandmother together. Today, immediately. The girl blinked, unsure if she heard him correctly. She didn't understand why someone so important would want to come to her small neighborhood, but his voice left no doubt. It was urgent. She felt her stomach twist with nerves as she followed him out of the office. Everyone in the hallway stared in confusion. The CEO never left the building during work hours unless it was a major emergency. And now he was walking beside a poor girl like she was the most important person in his world. People whispered, phones subtly raised to capture the unusual scene, but he didn't care. He walked with purpose. And as they stepped into the elevator, the girl's heart pounded harder with every floor they passed. She had no idea that the truth waiting for her at home was bigger than anything she had imagined, and that her entire life was about to change. The ride to her neighborhood felt unreal for both of them. The girl kept glancing at the CEO, trying to understand why a man who controlled millions of dollars was sitting quietly beside her in a simple taxi. He had offered to send a company car, but she insisted the taxi was faster. She didn't want to waste a second when her grandmother's voice had sounded so weak on the phone. The CEO didn't argue. He simply nodded and followed her lead, something no one in his company would ever believe he would do. As the car rolled through busy streets and then into narrower roads, the CEO's expressions changed slowly. He saw small homes squeezed tightly together, children running barefoot, old shops with faded paint, and people working hard just to survive. He had passed by this area many times in his life, but he had never actually stepped into it. And now, he was here, following a girl who seemed to carry the weight of both worlds on her shoulders. The girl's hands were shaking slightly as she guided the driver through turns. When they finally stopped in front of her house, she apologized for the place being small and old. The CEO shook his head, telling her she didn't need to explain anything. He stepped out of the car and looked around quietly. The air felt heavier here, not because of the place, but because he knew he was about to face something he had avoided for years. The girl unlocked the door and stepped inside. Her grandmother was lying on a small bed in the corner, trying to sit up when she saw them. The CEO rushed forward and gently told her not to move too much. The grandmother stared at him with eyes full of a history that only they understood. The girl stood there, confused and nervous, wondering what connection these two people possibly had. The grandmother reached out her hand, and the CEO held it with surprising tenderness. He asked her why she had kept everything from him for so long. Her voice trembled as she answered. She said she had been protecting the girl because she didn't want her to grow up in the middle of the same painful battles that once consumed their lives. She believed the girl deserved peace, and she feared that bringing the CEO into her life earlier would only reopen old wounds. The girl finally couldn't take the silence anymore. She knelt beside them and asked directly what was going on. Her voice cracked as she admitted she was scared. She wanted the truth. The grandmother looked at her with tears forming in her eyes. She said there was something she should have told her long ago, something that had been hidden for her own safety, something that connected her directly to the man standing in the room. The CEO took a slow breath. He had been preparing himself for this, but saying it aloud still felt overwhelming. He looked at the girl gently and told her that her parents had not just passed away by accident. There had been a complicated dispute years ago involving land, inheritance, and betrayal within a powerful family. Her father had been part of that family, and the CEO had been part of that same story. The girl stared at him, stunned. She didn't know what to process: first, the mention of a powerful family, or the fact that this CEO was somehow tied to them. The grandmother explained that the documents the girl found were proof of her father's rightful share in that family's wealth, a share that had been taken away through manipulation and lies. She revealed that when the girl's parents tried to fight for justice, things turned dangerous. People who didn't want the truth to come out targeted them. After they died, the grandmother took the girl and disappeared into a simple life far from the chaos. She kept the papers hidden so no one would come after her granddaughter again. She believed the fight was too big, too dangerous, and not worth risking the girl's life. The CEO listened silently, but his face showed deep regret. He confessed that when all of this happened, he had been young and unaware of the full truth. He only realized years later how much injustice had been done. And when he finally gathered enough power to confront the people behind it, it was already too late. Everyone involved had gone their separate ways. Documents disappeared. Evidence was buried. And the girl, the last innocent person caught in the middle of the conflict, had vanished with her grandmother before he could find her. The girl's lips trembled as she asked why he seemed so affected. The grandmother squeezed her hand gently. She told her that the CEO was not just some distant figure connected to her past. He had been very close to her father. They had grown up together like brothers. They had shared dreams. They had planned to build a future that would change their community. But greed from others tore them apart. The CEO had spent years searching for her, hoping to make things right, but he never knew where she was. The CEO's eyes softened as he told her that seeing her walk into his office had felt like seeing a ghost from his past return unexpectedly. He didn't know how to react, which was why he had been shocked and confused. But he knew one thing for certain: he didn't want to lose her again. Not now that fate had brought her back into his life. The girl felt her heartbeat racing. She looked down at the floor, struggling to process everything. She wasn't angry, but she was overwhelmed. She had lived her entire life believing her parents died with no deeper story behind it. Now she was discovering that their legacy was far bigger and more complicated than she ever imagined. The grandmother suddenly coughed harshly, and both of them rushed to help her. She managed to whisper that there was one document missing from the bundle. One final piece of the truth that she had hidden somewhere else because it was too dangerous. The CEO asked where it was, but the grandmother said she could only reveal it once she knew the girl truly wanted to step into this past. She warned that choosing to uncover the truth could change her life forever. It could also bring back enemies who once tried to silence the story completely. The girl felt a cold shiver run through her. For the first time in her life, she realized she stood at a crossroads. She could remain the simple girl she had always been, working hard, living quietly, and staying out of danger. Or she could step into a world filled with power, secrets, and unfinished justice. The CEO watched her carefully. He told her she didn't need to make a decision right away, but she could see it in his eyes. He hoped she would choose the truth. He wanted her to reclaim what was rightfully hers, and he wanted to stand beside her while she did. Her grandmother's breathing grew weaker. She whispered that there was something else the CEO hadn't told her, something even he struggled to say. The girl looked at both of them, fear and curiosity mixing inside her, and then with a trembling voice, the grandmother said the words that froze the room, but the final part of the truth would change everything. The grandmother's voice trembled as she tried to continue, and both the girl and the CEO leaned closer. The room felt colder, the air heavier, every second stretching longer. The grandmother looked at her granddaughter with eyes filled with love and sadness, and then she turned her gaze toward the CEO. It was clear that what she was about to reveal was something she had carried alone for far too long. She reached for the girl's hand and whispered that the truth she had been protecting was not only about the stolen inheritance or the dangerous fight her parents had been dragged into. Those things were painful, but this secret was deeper, more personal, and more life-changing. The CEO's eyes tightened, knowing exactly what she was referring to. He had thought about this moment for years. He had rehearsed 1,000 ways to say it, yet he had never found the right words. The grandmother directed her attention back to the girl and told her that her father wasn't just connected to the CEO through friendship. Their lives were tied in a much stronger way. She hesitated, as if giving herself one last chance to back out, but the girl's terrified expression pushed her to speak. With a trembling breath, she told her that the CEO had been more than a friend to her father. He was his brother. Not by blood, but by law. They had grown up in the same household, raised by the same guardian. They shared the same roof, the same responsibilities, and the same last name for many years. The girl stared at the CEO, stunned. He looked down, unable to hold her gaze. The grandmother continued, explaining that the CEO had been adopted into the family when he was young, taken in by her father's parents. They raised him like their own. Her father and the CEO had been inseparable, supporting each other through everything. When the inheritance dispute began, her father had tried to protect him as well. But the greed and corruption in the family grew worse, and everything spiraled out of control. The grandmother's voice shook as she revealed that when her parents died, the CEO searched desperately for her, but she had taken the girl far away, changing her identity slightly so no one could track them. She wanted to keep her granddaughter safe, not knowing whether the CEO was friend or foe. Over the years, she saw him rise to power, build companies, and create a new life, but she could never gather the courage to reach out. Afraid of dragging him back into the dangerous past, the girl sat frozen, her mind spinning with shock. This man, this powerful CEO sitting beside her, had been her father's brother in every way that mattered. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some disconnected figure in her story. He was her uncle. The realization was so overwhelming that her heart felt like it stopped for a moment. She took a shaky breath and looked at him, unable to speak. The CEO slowly lifted his head. His eyes were filled with regret, guilt, grief, and a tenderness she had never seen before. He admitted that he had withheld that truth because he didn't want to overwhelm her all at once. He wanted to protect her from the same pain he had carried for years. He told her that losing her father had broken him in a way no one else ever understood. And when they couldn't find her afterward, it felt like losing the last piece of him too. He whispered that seeing her walk into his office was like having a missing part of his life suddenly return. He wanted to tell her everything immediately, but he didn't want to scare her. He didn't want her to feel pressured into accepting him or the past. But now the truth was out, and his voice cracked as he told her that she had every right to know who she truly was. The grandmother's breathing grew more labored, and she reached out weakly. The girl rushed to hold her hand, tears filling her eyes. The grandmother smiled softly, saying she had held on to life long enough to make sure the truth was finally known. She apologized for the years of secrets, but she said her greatest fear had always been losing her granddaughter the same way she had lost her daughter. She had only wanted to protect her. The CEO knelt beside the bed and promised her that the girl would never be alone again. He swore that he would take responsibility for her, guide her, support her, and make up for all the years he wasn't there. The grandmother's eyes softened with relief. She whispered that she trusted him, just as her father once had. A long silence filled the room before the grandmother closed her eyes and rested. She wasn't gone. She was simply exhausted, slipping into a deep sleep. The girl wiped her tears and sat quietly, absorbing everything. Her emotions were tangled: confusion, grief, anger, relief, and a strange sense of belonging she had never felt before. She had spent her entire life feeling small, unnoticed, and forgotten by the world. But now she discovered she was connected to a powerful legacy and a man who cared more than she ever imagined. The CEO gently asked if she wanted to know about the missing document. She nodded slowly. He explained that it wasn't just a financial paper. It was legal proof that her father had left his share of the inheritance to her. It meant she wasn't poor by fate. She had been robbed of a life she rightfully deserved. The grandmother had hidden the document in a safe place because if the wrong people found it, they would have come after her. The girl felt a spark inside, a mix of anger and strength. She wanted the document, she wanted the truth, and she wanted justice for her parents. The CEO saw the determination in her eyes and told her he would help her reclaim everything. Not because of wealth, but because her father had trusted him to protect her future. And he intended to keep that promise. They stepped outside for fresh air, standing in the dim evening light. For the first time, the girl looked at the CEO not with fear or confusion, but with a quiet sense of connection. She asked him what would happen next. He told her that the journey ahead would be difficult, but she wouldn't face it alone. He would guide her. He would fight for her. And he would make sure her parents' story finally received justice. She took a deep breath, feeling a new strength growing inside her. The life she knew had ended, but a new one was beginning. A life filled with truth, power, and family she never knew she had. The CEO placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and told her that her future was brighter than she realized. And with that, the girl stepped forward into a world that had once been stolen from her, ready to reclaim it at last.